This video will serve as a tutorial and walkthrough of the Rice Statistics app, which is now publicly accessible. If you do not have access to the app yet, you can head over to the store on our website to buy your monthly subscription. If we head over to the app very quickly, you'll land on the home page. Of course, we have little instructions to help you navigate through the analysis datasets, but this is what we'll be going over today. The first thing I do want to point out is that if you have any features or any instruments that you would like to see us include in this app, make sure to fill out this form from this button. If we head over to our first analysis of seasonality, you'll find it very, very intuitive. You select your instrument, and then you see your seasonality charts plot. Of course, if you hover over it, you have all the data, and you can also select on and off certain specific legends, certain specific data sets, like your 15-year, 10-year, 5-year averages, year to date, all time. You can see a chart based on solely what you want. You can also plot multiple different instruments at once with the current limit of 4. If you would like to see more than 4 instruments, go to the home page and request that feature to be added later. Our second analysis is the ranges analysis. For the ranges analysis, you do have to select your instrument and a time window before seeing any of the dashboards. You can see that you have multiple different options, and these time windows are sessions, specific days based on different times, standard time, New York time, or weeks and month. If we go over to the weekly, for example, you'll see that we have our analysis dashboard plotted, as well as multiple different tabs and multiple different filtering options. If we go from the top down, you'll find your date filtering options. Those can be filtered for the entire dataset, relative times, so you can filter based on relative years, months, and days from today. So for example, here it would be the last 5 years, the last 3 years. You can also select specific years only. So I only want to include data, for example, from 2024 and let's say 2018. You can do the same with months to only include data for certain months, or set a very specific custom date range with the start and end date. If we go back to the entire data set, you'll find just below you have direction filters to only look at bullish days, bearish days, and weeks in this very specific case. Months, it works for all of the different time windows analysis. And for example, you can also have specific time window filtering. So in this case of the weekly, I can look and filter based on the week of the month. So I only want to know for the first weeks of the month, in this case, that are bullish. If I go to the monthly, for example, you'll find very specific months. And if we go to the daily or any other session, you'll find that it is based on the day of the week. You can also have other specific filters for extremes, low rates, and high rates. So I can filter based on these conditions between X time and X time. So the high forming between, currently it serves the entire range, and so it will range from the entire set of instruments. But if I wanted to know only the raids that happened post New York session, right? So during New York, and let's remove this, for example, and remove our specific extremes filtering, you'll see that I only have the data when the previous low rate is present during these times, and I can then head over to my other dashboards to gain some insights. If I just reset the filters here very quickly, we can head over to the Extremes tab. Well, first of all, we should perhaps go over the dashboard. You'll find very intuitive data. Everything is very well explained. You do have help parameters so that you can understand what these things are, what these metrics are, and you can hover over to this chart if you want to see it based on time, based on date. You do have your entire date range right here based on your specific filtering rule. Of course, how many are bearish, how many are bullish. You do have very specific counts. You have your average high, average low time for your specific time window, which currently is the daily standard time. And you have all your average range levels, so average range, average distribution, manipulation. These as explained right here, these are all distances from opening price, distances from, for example, for the retracement, the high to the close. And if any of these metrics in any of the dashboards are misunderstood, you can head over to the help tab and you'll find, well, the video tutorial here, but under you'll also find how all of these metrics are established in these nice little expanders. If we go ahead to the extremes tab, you'll find your extremes probabilities and distribution charts. So the probabilities of our highs and lows, in green we have our highs, in red we have our lows, being formed between very specific time ranges. You can also adjust these charts to be based on the precision you want from this sidebar time interval. So for example, if I want to know based on 3-hour time ranges, then I can just set the charts to 3 hours. Whenever I'm heading into smaller time windows, for example, the New York opening range, which is just an hour, I will select some more precise time intervals. But when I look at the daily, I like to keep the charts clean and no need to be extremely precise on this end. Let me put it back to an hour, and then we can head over to the next tab, which is for rates. Very similar charts. You have your probabilities of there being a high rate, a low rate, as well as time distribution charts, of course, including hover data. So if you hover over any single bar, you get the total count where that happens. So for example, in this case was when we rated the high between 9 and 10. The percentages, of course, and these are not percentages of the data set. These are percentage chance of us taking out previous day high between these specific times. And of course, when implementing your filtering, it does affect all of the data inside both of the tabs. You also have access to the raw data, whether you want to backtest specifics or you want to see some metrics in a different way. Well, you do have all the data which you can filter based on high times. You can filter everything, and by hovering over each column, you'll get the definition of what that column gives you as information. Following the ranges analysis, we have the bias analysis. Now, this is based on very specific logic, which this is what we'll start with. It is based on very specific logic that was first introduced to me by T-Trades. If we look at it, it analyzes the two previous candles and how their close, how the previous candle closes through relative levels from that previous candle, and we then establish a next day bias for this. I said next day, but this can be analyzed with multiple time windows, as you can see right here. So you can have a monthly bias, a weekly bias, and daily biases, of course, with a day from midnight to midnight and a day with standard trading hours, which are different for every single instrument that we have here, of course, including a few crypto instruments as well currently. If we head over to the dashboard, you'll find that it is the same exact dashboard as the ranges. Why? Because these metrics are useful in both cases, so we decided to place the same dashboard again here. If we look at the filtering options, you'll also find that they are all the same, except for one new specific filtering, and that filtering is based on bias. So if you want to analyze some specific biases, you can go over here and filter based on previous high, previous low, or no bias. Of course, this will adjust based on your time window. If we look to the little help tab, you'll find what these little abbreviations mean. If we head over now to the bias analysis, you'll find a new dashboard with the bias occurrence, success rate, reasoning behind why that bias happened. Of course, you have a nice little pie chart to show you the distribution of that bias, when we had that bias, the counts, and you can also find the success rate of the specific biases here. And of course, once again, raw data followed by your help so that you can understand the logic behind the bias analysis. Lastly, we have my favorite dashboard, the opening gaps. Now you have to select which gap type. Currently, we include new week opening gaps, new day opening gaps, and regular trading hours gap. Again, if you are unfamiliar with what these are, head over to the help tab and you'll find a complete explanation of every type of gap and how they are formed, along with visual cues to help you understand. You'll find also that from the filtering, we have the same filtering, except that now we have gap specific filtering. So you can filter based on the gap size, based on the gap fill. So making sure, for example, I only want to know about gaps that were at least 50% fill. And now my database will adjust to these specific filtering. If I want to turn them off, I can turn them off. If I have multiple different settings on, I can just click on the reset filters option in the sidebar and it will reset all of your filters. You also have filtering based on specific fill day. So when the gap was filled at its maximum, this is all available in the raw data. If you go ahead and look at fill day, it explains what this specific metric is just by hovering over the columns. If we go more precisely into our dashboard, you'll find your complete date range, of course, as always, but you'll also find average gap size and fill. So for this gap size, we average for these gaps in this current filtering, which currently it looks at the entire data set, you'll find that the combined gap up, gap down, average sizes, and fill. You'll also find the fill time distribution. So the gap is usually filled by what time, and you'll find also all the probabilities if you hover over these. You also have very specific metrics, as you can see, based on the gaps type, right? So gap up, gap down. How do we close on the day? So a bullish close on the day, a bearish close on the day for gap up and down. And you'll also find how many of them in a percentage. And of course, if you hover an account as well, are 50% filled and fully filled. So very nice data here, as well as distributions, as you can see right here, to know how many times, how much do we gap up, how much do we gap down. Again, all explained in help if this is unfamiliar logic to you. You also have the revisit times chart. Now, for new week opening gaps, this only looks at days and the probability of us returning to new week opening gap based on the very specific day. If we go to a more precise, so for example, we'll head over to regular trading hours gap, which is our opening range gap for those the ICT traders. You'll find also with your custom time interval that you can set your revisit times chart with every single time window in the day. So of course, for the regular trading hours, we look at 9:30 to 4:15, and you'll find all of the probabilities of us returning to the regular trading hours gap based on what the time of day is. Of course, with data like this, I would recommend that you use custom filtering because you have to be very precise. I like to use the last 5 years at all time, which is why it is set to default as the relative. And I also like to filter based on our day of the week. So for example, today was Friday. This is all that the app currently includes. As I stated in the beginning of this video, make sure to utilize this feature and instrument request form. We want to follow the community to know what you guys want to see so that we may prioritize our work to bring you guys more analysis, more dashboards to this beautiful app.